Welcome to CGTN. We are now at the 2024 Rare Diseases Research Conference, and there are around 300 million people living with rare diseases worldwide. And so it's very important for us to team up internationally to help them. And today we're going to discuss the potential and challenges of global cooperation on rare diseases. And joining me today are three guests, and let me introduce them to you one by one. Dr. Adam Resnick. He is the director of the Center for Data-Driven Discovery in Biomedicine at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Dr. Gao Guangping, he's the director of Hore Gene Therapy Center at the University of Massachusetts Chen Medical School. And also, Dr. Wang Yi, she is the president of National Children's Medical Center and Children's Hospital of Fudan University. And so, just like I said, we're going to talk about the potential and challenges of global cooperation on rare diseases today. And I want to start our discussion with gene therapy. And I'm going to be honest with you, before I prepare for this topic, I didn't know much about gene therapy, and I thought it's something like really far away from my life, from the public, and I don't know where I got this idea. Maybe from the sci-fi movie, you know, it's some really high-tech thing that's been dominated by some really rich people that help them remain on the top of the pyramid. But surprisingly, I realized that after I do the research, I realized, oh, it's in fact much more accessible to the public than I thought, and it's actually become a very promising way of treatment for rare diseases. So Dr. Gao, can you just tell us a little bit about what gene therapy is? What's in the package? What do I have to do, like medicine or surgery or anything?
Yeah. So in simple way, gene therapy is to use gene as the medicine to treat diseases. Mm-hmm. And so in general, there are two types of gene therapy drugs. One type is so-called ex vivo. So in this case, you take human patient cells out, genetically modified, expanded, and infuse back to human. And those modified cells will function as a living drug in human body to treat the disease or diseases. And second version is called in vivo gene therapy. This will be very much like traditional medicine. You basically inject or taking medicine orally, and this will get into human body and start treat the diseases. And depends on the nature of a delivery platform and modality, the durability may be different. But that's my general sense of the gene therapy.
So how is it different from the traditional medicine or traditional way of treating rare diseases?
So in general, the gene therapy usually used for treat genetic diseases. Mm-hmm. And gene therapy with particularly just treat the disease at the root of the cause. In this case, if you have genetic mutations, you either missing a gene function or your gene become toxic and you want to silence that gene. Or in some cases, you could use gene editing to modify gene. Doesn't matter what's the nature of the mutation. So in all these cases, you treat the roots of the diseases, not the symptoms.
So can I say, is it like a panacea for all kinds of rare diseases if I can actually edit it?
Yeah, rare gene therapy in most of cases are personalized medicine. Meaning that it depends on your genetic mutations. It could become generic if you have the same type of the gene defect. You could use generic ways, but in general, it's more genetic medicine and personalized medicine.
Okay, so also, why is it important for countries to work together on gene therapy, do you think?
I guess everybody may have different points. And from my point of view, I strongly believe rare diseases, genetic diseases, have no borders. And it doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter what your ethnic background. If you have gene mutation, you will get the disease. Maybe in different ethnic group or geographic regions, the mutation types may be different. But I think gene therapy treatments will be similar. So that because of that, I think collaboration is very important because what we learned from China, Shanghai, could be very informative and useful for patients in Boston, United States, and could it be in South Africa, could it be anywhere in the world.
Okay, so my next question is for Dr. Wang Yi. So how is China doing in developing gene therapy?
So China have been actively involved in the international gene therapy research, and with the number of the clinical trial for the gene therapy ranking the second in the world, and some of the clinical trial is at the forefront of the international research. So in 2017, China joined ICH. That means can share the clinical trial data and the information, and so the government pushed the integration of the clinical research into the international research.
Okay, so what role do you see China will be playing in the future for gene therapy for rare diseases?
Since in China we have the large population and have the specific cohort for the different rare diseases, so we can provide the good cohort the patients for the gene therapy clinical trial, and the government to push the integration of the different resources to
Okay, so Dr. Wang Yi, my question for you now is that there are already some gene therapy products available and proved to be effective outside of China. And so how's the accessibility of these, of Chinese patients to these products? And how can we improve the access?
Okay, so by now in China, we have some special policy for the gene therapy products outside the China. We just set up some the base, such as Hainan, Beijing, and Shanghai, and to get the faster pathway to provide the specific gene therapy. And the CDE in China get some their new strategy and the policy to push these gene therapy products come in, license in fastly, and increase the number of the gene therapy. And some patients can go abroad to get the gene therapy actually in China. So there were some the rare disease patients, they can get the gene therapy by now, such as the Zolgensma or such as the other the gene therapy all over the world.
Okay. So Dr. Resnick, you're an expert in big data, this technology, and can you share with us how this technology can improve our understanding and the treatment or diagnosis of rare diseases?
Sure. Now, so you've been asking a lot of questions about gene therapy, but I think, you know, the reason I think gene therapy is so exciting is because it's a new modality that adds to a portfolio of different types of therapies. So from a rare disease context, it's not the case that only gene therapy works to treat rare diseases. But in order to interpret what's the right drug and what the right patient come together, or how they come together, you have to have a data-driven approach. And I think that's the second half of the story of new approaches to therapeutics. So the reason gene therapy is so powerful is because we can now measure and test genes in patients. And in many ways, that's the first barrier, right? So the first barrier to even harness a gene therapy or available therapies is the right diagnosis. And so it turns out that two patients may look exactly the same, but have very different biologies underneath. Or they might have very similar biology, but they have different presentations of the disease. And it turns out that it's not so trivial to really diagnose and fully understand the underpinnings of disease unless you can compare information across patients. And so in many key successes in precision medicine or personalized approaches, the key has always been to have foundational data that can drive the development of a new therapy to match a drug to a patient. And so the key challenge for rare diseases oftentimes is really understanding that underlying biology. And whether you're trying to do that within a university or a country or globally, it has not always been the case that it's easy to connect data and share data. And you know, I think a lot of emphasis is sometimes placed on sharing data across countries. But the reality is that sharing data is hard even within one country, right? Even across institutions. The incentive structures and the paradigms for performing research make it quite challenging sometimes to share data early and fast. And so in many ways, the principles, right, that underlie accelerated discovery and the harnessing of these new data to drive new gene therapy development or repositioning of existing drugs for patients is really underpinned by the capacity to interpret new data modalities in large-scale data sets. And to do that, you have to connect, and connection is the key.
So can I say for you, it's very important to build like a shared database, maybe across the world?
I think the key part is to be able to connect data and interpret, to make it queryable, right? So, you know, a clinician may see a patient in front of them, and it may be the case in a rare disease setting that this is the first time they see this patient with that particular mutation. How are they going to interpret that biology. They have two choices. One is somebody has already published and established the underlying disease mechanism, or the other is to actually harness whatever data is available. And I think that's one of the key opportunities that has emerged, is that the technology to share and connect data in real time is now apparent. You know, one of my favorite things about coming to China is I get to use WeChat more often. And you know, I think one of the really key sort of components is that immediately you see the benefit of rapid connectivity across services, across features, across humans in real time. And in many ways, we have not adopted that in the context of medicine, whether that's in China, in the United States, or globally, as a framework to fully harness the technological opportunity on behalf of this. And the rare disease context has both an unmet need and the patient population and clinicians who are very willing to engage in that experiment.
So do you guys have any suggestions to improve the connectivity?
I think it's really stakeholder, I'll start. I think it's really stakeholder engagement. I think what's really amazing about this conference we're in today is that it's really, you know, advocate run, right? So it's really patients and stakeholders themselves owning the vision for what should happen. And we've seen this in the United States, that whenever you have stakeholder engagement across the patients, the clinicians, the researchers, you start aligning and coordinating the activities across those spaces. You start empowering people to play their role on behalf of a common vision. And that vision ends up being shared across communities, across nations, and globally. And so I think it's not a trivial or an easy thing to do, right? But I think it's now a possible thing to do. And the minute something is possible, you create a mandate to reach that possibility.
Yeah, Dr. Wang Yi, do you have anything to share on this point?
Yes, you know, the data sharing is raised the concern about the patient's privacy. So we have the informatic system to protect the patient's privacy in China in the hospital. So share the data mostly can by the large scientific research plan or the multiple center, the international multiple center clinical trial. And we can share the research, the data, and to care about create the high quality database. And on the other hand, in China, the government to publish many database data platform for the rare disease. Especially for the rare disease, the cohort study, and to share the patients' the data by the public platform, and also get some special mechanism and the pathway to provide the database during the international clinical trial, clinical research.
You know, in the United States, this is you know, a very long-standing discussion. So even, you know, within the context of simply looking at U.S.-based research, over the past probably 5 years especially, I think we've seen transformation in this. One, the recognition that not all patients with different diseases have the same motivation or willingness to potentially share their data. And so, for example, we work with a lot of families who have rare cancers. And if you are our family with a child with a rare cancer, oftentimes you have a very limited amount of time to try and make decisions and look for opportunities for care.
Correct.
And so what we found is that those families are very eager, right, to share their data as rapidly as possible for any solution possible because they have a limited time window. Other families may have longer times, right, to essentially address a therapeutic intervention or a challenge, and they may have different consideration about when and with whom they share data. So in the United States, over the past 5 years, what we've seen is a transformation where two things. One, the basic question of who owns the data is more apparent. And in the United States, over the last 2 years especially, policy has really been established to confirm and empower patients to own their own data in many ways and make decisions about their own data. Second is when the government funds research, there are clear expectations about when and how that data should be shared with the community at large. So really displacing the decision-making about when data should be shared, especially when funded by the federal government, into a more common purpose framework. Then the third is really establishing new standards for how data is shared, meaning ensuring that even as data are shared, if you adopt certain standards, you actually empower the use of that data. And I think these are key principles that are global in nature moving forward. But I just wanted to highlight that, again, part of the reason the rare disease community is so special is because when you have a rare disease, you are at your core looking for connection and data, right? More information about what I can do next. And so the motivation space around sharing and communicating is much, much higher, right, in the rare disease, because you as a family, as a patient, are looking for information or looking to harness new knowledge. And so I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all framework around how data gets shared and with whom it gets shared. And I think that's what I meant, where there's a stakeholder component of really understanding this process and then learning between communities how to fully empower that framework on behalf of those communities, and really providing agency to both patients, clinicians, and researchers to empower this.
Dr. Gao, do you have anything to say?
I thought Dr. Resnick covered very
well said.
Well said. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So another question still for Dr. Resnick. So we know that sometimes the data that's generated for the research purposes is not really is not something that's for the clinical purposes. So who should be doing the translation, and how do we fill the gap between these two?
I think this is a really great question. And again, I think this is something that in the rare disease setting, there's an immense opportunity for innovation. So another key transformation across the last 5 or 10 years is that the number and different types of assays and modalities that we can generate just continues to explode, right? So we can measure disease states and the biology of patients in many, many, many more ways now than ever before. But validating and applying all these different ways of testing in the clinical setting takes time. And you can think about it from a number of different perspectives. For example, when you're performing research, you're trying to assemble cohorts and analyze that data. When you're providing care, you have to really make sure that the sample you tested is the sample that came from that patient, right? You don't want to make a mistake and misinterpret that result. So the level of coordination and validation that's required for the clinical application of data is much, much higher than when you're performing research in that context. The challenge ends up being that in the rare disease setting, when the assays that are present do not yet provide enough new information to change the practice, right? So if you have a rare disease, oftentimes your challenge is that there isn't a standard of care, right? There isn't an off-the-shelf menu to say, you have this disease, you get this therapy. So many rare disease populations are constantly eager, right, to embrace a new assay or a new modality, a new type of data. And there's a gap in time and capacity to implement that. The best way we know on how to harness this is to formalize the process of applying data-driven efforts in the context of trials. So clinical trials end up being a key component of that translation, right? So a clinical trial can not only test whether a drug works, but a clinical trial can also ask the question whether a new modality works, or how do we improve the use of that data on behalf of that patient. And again, I think innovating on how data-driven practices intersect with clinical trials and their development is another key opportunity. And again, another key opportunity, as was highlighted, for sharing practices and data between communities that are performing trials.
Okay. So just now, Dr. Gao mentioned that the cross-border cooperation, rare diseases should be cross-border. And I think in this area, the EU has set a very good example because there's some data, for example, around 85% of Europe's rare disease research community is involved in joint programs to identify centers across different countries aiming to share resources effectively. But the situation is quite different in the Asia-Pacific area because we have an array of languages, culture, religions, and access of healthcare, and also different levels of economic development. And so this imbalance, in fact, underscore the importance of global cooperation on rare diseases. And my next question is for Dr. Wang Yi. So you're the director of the Children's Hospital of Fudan University, and from your clinical experience, what are the most unmet needs of Chinese patients with rare diseases?
You know, in clinical practice, the rare disease patients come in the clinic and to give us every question is very urgent, such as how is it happened and what's the causes and is it be treated or cured, and how to have another health baby for this family. So many questions we need to answer. And in the clinical diagnosis and treatment, we just get some education program for the parents to let them to know to answer these questions. And also we just every year in China, in a hospital, we just set up the family organization, the rare disease organization, the family meeting in the hospital, and combined with the scientific the meeting, such as this meeting, just invited the family, the parents to participate in the international or some important education program to answer these questions. And in the other hand, we just education or to tell the parents for the rare disease, sometimes cured and often the relief and always comfort. So we just give the many emotion, the support for the families, and together the resources together to help the rare disease the family. So it's very challenging and big. But we just try our best to set up. And in the clinical, make the clinical decision, we have the AI support system in our clinic. So when patient give us some diagnosis of the gene mutation, the report, we just get some information from the AI for the clinical decision system to get the knowledge from all the world and to know is there any clinical trial, is there any the organization, international organization such as the Rett syndrome, Angelman syndrome, Dravet syndrome, and to translation the education the documents to our family. So.
Okay. So I just came up with like a little bit of random questions. So is AI technology a really big thing right now for your research or for your therapy, Dr. Gao?
Yeah, I'm sure this is a big thing for Dr. Resnick and also for your patient population. From our side, AI is also now getting into gene therapy vector development. So it could be as there are some talks at this meeting, people use AI to generate next generation of gene delivery vehicles and based on what we learned. And also with AI technology, you can optimize and design your gene therapy cassette or drug, gene drug. So yes, I think this become a trend to understand or to generate a better next generation of the gene therapy drugs.
Okay, that's very interesting to know. Let me come back to you, Dr. Wang Yi. So what's China doing to promote a global cooperation on rare diseases?
Since the government recently, the government asked the national medical center, such as the national child health medical center, to set up their research, the institute and the clinical research ward. In a hospital, we have the 60 beds for the clinical research. Some the gene therapy or some the molecular intervention, the therapy clinical trial can come in and to get high quality the clinical research. And also the government to set up some program or project for the rare disease cohort. So it just ask to build the nationwide the rare disease cohort and to keep the follow-up and to get the high quality the database, the follow-up, the phenotype, and there was some research program for this cohort. And also encouraged the nature history study for the rare disease. And in the other hand, just to build some platform to get the researchers, clinical doctors, and the patient families, and commercial companies, and some charity foundation, and the social work, so can build this platform to join together and integrate these resources and to push the rare disease study and the clinical service.
Oh, okay.
I also want to add a little bit. I think this new development in China is very interesting. This kind of upgrade the clinical care facility for rare disease treatment. Last October, I paid a very short visit to Peking Union Hospital, and in their what do you call it? They called a rare disease research center. Yes, okay. Yeah, Peking Union. Just like what you described, they have a very beautiful state-of-art clinical trial units, suites, and what they can do, just amazing. Equipment-wise, and also facility and professionals, nurses, doctors. It's just beautiful. I'm very happy to see that kind of development.
Okay. All right. So, do you, Dr. Resnick, do you have any add-ons on the use of AI in your big data?
Yes, I think all of us, right? Whether you're manufacturing or generating new gene therapies, or leveraging big data, or providing clinical care at the patient interface, really see AI technologies as a game changer. I think what's also really clear is that the use of AI and AI technologies itself is a rapidly evolving field. And so I think there is this balance that as a community we're trying to navigate between both harnessing the full potential of AI technologies as rapidly as possible on behalf of our patient population, while also being responsible about its use and application. Like any powerful technology, you have to essentially balance the responsibility and its implementation and the value that it can provide. I think what is clear is that the rare disease population is uniquely poised to benefit from these technologies. One of the key challenges in the rare disease is often framed as not enough data. But the other way to also think about it is, have we maximized the interpretation of the data we have or the data we can generate? And I think this is a key opportunity for applying AI-based technologies, is to really fully maximize the integration of data sets and to fully harness that opportunity in ways that is not always feasible in the absence of AI. The other part of AI, which I think is really exciting for the rare disease community, is the capacity to democratize access to care interpretation. So, you know, here in this conference, we have amazing clinicians who have amazing expertise, but you know, the reality is that whether you're in China or the United States, there isn't uniformity of access to experts in this context. And I think the opportunity to incorporate knowledge via artificial intelligence as a co-pilot, as an augmentation of any clinician, particularly in a rare disease setting where, you know, very few clinicians have seen these types of patients. But the artificial intelligence, it only has to see it once, and it remembers and knows, right, in many ways. So that's the other powerful potential, to really think about artificial intelligence as a co-pilot augmenter in ways that could potentially democratize access to diagnosis or care decision in ways that can harness the knowledge of experts and for it to be applied. So I think it's the combination of both, right, maximizing the interpretation and learning new things, but also democratizing the use of data on behalf of patients in a global fashion.
Okay, so let us come back to the policy. So what policies in the U.S. that supports global cooperation on rare diseases, and how can they be improved? Dr. Gao, maybe?
Yeah, first of all, I think we have an NIH leader in rare disease research here at the conference, PJ Brook. And he actually initiated different programs, not only just US patients, but patients from other countries. And also, we observed that companies actually invited patients from other countries to join clinical trials, first-in-human trials, in their company leading clinical tests. So those are things I would say it's more at a practicality level, but in terms of policy or other things, I'm sorry to say I'm not the right person to ask, to answer.
I can highlight a couple of things, yeah. You know, so, you know, I think there's recognition that, you know, large-scale data sets funded by federal governments, data that's coming from the clinical enterprise, from hospital systems, you know, are one complex, and you know, there are multiple layers of policies. There are hospital policies, regional policies that affect this. And the challenge, you know, I'll give you an example. Even between the EU and the US, right, it's not trivial to exchange healthcare data. And that's partly because I think it's very clear that in the context of the EU or in the US that when you say data, right, you can mean a whole set of different things, right? And so oftentimes policies begin with risk mitigation as a process to ensure that bad things don't happen, that we maximize the opportunities to protect patients' rights, and fully empower the potential of data to be used in the right way. As I mentioned earlier, I think what we also see in the context of US policy is targeted efforts to create partnerships. So for example, you could envision, and I think this is some of the activities we've seen from the NIH and the federal government, to say, all right, in rare pediatric cancers, let's establish a formal collaboration, because we recognize that this is an unmet need and we have shared values to address this. So whenever you can align, I think, values that are beneficial for both sides, multiple sides, and most importantly for patients, I think that's an opportunity to innovate from a policy perspective and test it. So what at least I've seen really as a researcher evolve is that rather than trying to create one unified policy that works in all contexts, right, really innovating in ways that test and explore in a responsible way targeted efforts where you have alignment, again, between patients, clinicians, and researchers on behalf of a common mission, recognizing that it might not be a policy that's applicable in all contexts, but in certain contexts, and especially in rare disease, it makes a lot of sense.
All right, so I hope that we had very informative discussion, and I hope that we can have more time for this, but we are actually running out of time. So let's end here, and thank you again for joining CGTN today, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Sissy, for your great questions.